For me, it was interesting to, first of all, collaborate with him, having this, researcher point of view without me necessarily doing the research, but me getting inspired from all this data and all this research that he's been doing throughout the years about what has been happening there. And there's a power plant that is by the coast, right in Huasco, which is one of the towns called Huasco, that has been affected with pollution, the city and how people live, and there's people that have cancer, and has been, polluted the Pacific and vegetation, and local fishermen don't have, fish anymore, etc. But all that minerals that arrive there comes from, the minings that happens in, throughout the Andes in that region. That mining project, even though it's supposed to be in pause right now, like people from the community were saying that it's not on pause anymore, that they're still like doing things there. But throughout the years, the mining project affected glaciers in the Andes, and those glaciers affected rivers, and that polluted, water, and obviously agriculture and people that live out of that in the Andes, all the way in the hills, in the mountains. Mind you, there's a lot of people that are in favor of this because obviously it brings economy and it brings progress to a certain extent, from my point of view, into the valley. And there's a lot of kind of activists against this.
I saw a wonderful installation of that as well. So take us into that.
I came by to the Huasco project, to the Valle project. It's based on the Huasco Valley in the north of Chile. This is the southern part of the Atacama region. It's the last active valley before the driest desert in the world starts, which is the Atacama Desert. And it's the last active valley because it's one of the valleys which still has like vegetation, and the river kind of affects the environment there. However, throughout the last 30 years, the valley has been dealing with a lot of kind of environmental, economic, and health issues that has been affecting the valley, for better or for worse, different aspects of the valley and how people live. From the border in the Andes, from the border from Chile and Argentina, to all the way to the Pacific, and in the middle as well. And I was invited to go to Huasco last year with my brother. My brother is his name is Eduardo Ordóñez. He lives in Alberta, in Edmonton, here in Canada, in the Alberta region. And he's an academic from the Athabasca University. Originally a civil engineer, but his practice has been taking him to different places. And lately he's been studying what has been happening in the Atacama region, in Huasco mostly. And he was gonna travel to the valley to do surveys and interviews with different kind of people from the community. For me, it was interesting to, first of all, collaborate with him, having this, researcher point of view without me necessarily doing the research, but me getting inspired from all this data and all this research that he's been doing throughout the years about what has been happening there, and trying to interpret that through my own eyes and through photography. So we visited the Huasco Valley and went to 5 specific areas of the valley. The valley is divided by different kind of cities that go through the river, through the valley, from the Andes all the way to the Pacific. And there's a power plant that is by the coast, right in Huasco, which is one of the towns called Huasco, that has been affected with pollution, the city and how people live, and there's people that have cancer, and has been, polluted the Pacific and vegetation, and local fishermen don't have, fish anymore, etc. But all that minerals that arrive there comes from, the minings that happens in, throughout the Andes in that region. but also like all the way in the border between Argentina and Chile. There's a mining program project called Pascua Lama. The Pascua side is on the Chilean side, and Lama is on the Argentinian side, and that's run by a Canadian-Chilean company. So Canada is also involved in that. And that mining project, even though it's supposed to be in pause right now, like people from the community were saying that it's not on pause anymore, that they're still like doing things there. But throughout the years, the mining project affected glaciers in the Andes, and those glaciers affected rivers, and that polluted, water and obviously agriculture and people that live out of that in the Andes, all the way in the hills, in the mountains. And those people are, local people, First Nations, Yaguitas, or different kind of people that work in different ways. Mind you, there's a lot of people that are in favor of this because obviously it brings economy and it brings progress to a certain extent, from my point of view, into the valley. And there's a lot of kind of activists against this. And what Eduardo and his team, and I say his team because he went with two civil engineers, master students from the University of Santiago of Chile. It was the four of us going to the valley. Eduardo was doing interviews with certain people from the communities through different kind of cities throughout the valley. The two students from the master program were doing service on the streets or in plazas in these communities. Different types of answers and questions, in terms of the survey, and the conversations that Eduardo was having was different as well, was more personalized. And I was sometimes, participating as a quiet spectator of these interviews. And many times I was just on my own, going through the environment, going through the territory, traveling with them throughout the valley, and sometimes on my own when they were spending a lot of time in one place. I took a car and just go on my own. But all the images in a way are a reflection of the data, the conversation, and all the research that they were that we were getting from this visit. And again, all the research from what has been happening throughout the years. So the photographs have been done in a very brief period of time. I might go back next year to do a little bit more photographs. But it's, again, a reflection of what has been happening with a very kind of subjective point of view. Is my own personal point of view, looking to, olive trees, which is one of the main agriculture kind of activities there, to how people live, to how roads have been intervened by the human intervention through companies. The presence of the state in the valley, how in a way the state, I think, has been putting more energy and more resources for roads, and selling this idea of we're building roads, we're building progress into the environments, but actually the reality is that they're actually building roads for the mining companies to actually move through the valley and destroy the valley. So that there's two ways there. Like obviously, the people use the roads, etc. But around the road, you can see a lot of poverty and a lot of abandonment. So the roads, they're fixing roads and they're building, they're making, they're putting jobs for the community. But then the end result is that it's in favor of the economy of the mining companies. And most of the miners are actually, from my understanding, they're coming from outside the valley. They go on turns, they stay there for like 7 days a week, and then but their family lives outside of the valley, like an hour away from there, where they don't have this kind of environmental issues. And there's photographs that are very descriptive, that they're showing perhaps, a thermoelectric plant or a pig processing plant that with the carcasses of the pigs have been issues and contaminating the valleys with a smell, but also contaminated the waters years ago. Or images like this where people telling us, the pollution of the powder from the iron that flows from the trains gets into the clothes that we put on our backyards to hang, or in the roofs of our houses. So all that kind of black powder gets physically visible into what they smell on a daily day. Or, having the view from the desert towards, this pollution thermoelectric plant by the Pacific. Draw in the environment and how that has been affected from, climate change but also like the intervention of the valley. Or abandoned, structures, because there's a lot of kind of people that have been, if there's a new company being installed into the valley, sometimes these companies go, door by door, offering money to the community for them to support this endeavor. And sometimes that's good, that's great, because they get money, but the money is never enough. And these people from the community might do an investment to put a restaurant where for 2 years you have like people that are traveling through the valley, stopping there to eat, the workers. But after that, this gets abandoned. So there's a lot of structures that are in progress to being built, like this one, or a lot of structures that are just abandoned through time, because companies have been kind of have been shut down because of environmental problems, or they just broke. And sometimes, these people from the community just have death, while nature, or how communities live, all the way in the Andes. So there's a breadth of images that kind of, for me, show the reflection. It goes along with a text that Eduardo wrote about this research, and his work on the side. He also travels to different parts of the world, presenting this work, not necessarily with my photographs, I think, but as a whole, in a more kind of academic point of view, speaking and writing papers about it. So it has also kind of different kind of outcomes. Right now, Eduardo was in New Zealand presenting this work in an academic convention. I presented this work in an exhibition in Gaspésie, which is north of Quebec, that you can see here in a public installation. Funny enough, in a bridge that looks towards a valley. So again, it's a different kind of outcome of the work that I'm interested in. It was also part of a group exhibition in Berlin early this year, and this goes along, with like public presentations of the work, as artist talks and things like that. But I'm also at the moment working with a Chilean publisher. Sorry, this exhibition is also curated by Claude Gaulet, which is the curator, the art director of the Gaspésie Photo Festival in Gaspésie. And I'm also, as I was saying, I'm also working with a Chilean publisher to hopefully, depending on a grant from the Chilean government, create a book next year in Chile with this photo publisher from Chile. For me, it's important for this book to, have a voice and be represented in Chile rather than actually publish it here, because again, it's about Chile and for Chile.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and we created a little book with Eduardo that shows some of the images and information and data information from the results from all that survey. And this book was a small edition, basically for us to give back to the community, that we sent back to the people that we interviewed, and in a way give a little bit of that information that we're gathering or that we are creating through photographs back to the community. So things like that are also have been important part of this project.
I was in a previous conversation earlier this week with somebody in Montana, and they were talking about the extraction industry and how that there's a complex relationship, and you referenced it a little bit with the community around. So it brings in money, but it also affects the land in a very profound way. And you referenced that complexity. Kind of talk to me a little bit about that. I'm curious, because you kind of said it right at the beginning of this. You're like, there's some people that are for it, some people that are against it. Like,
Yeah.
where have you gotten with that?
I mean, it's very understandable, the different kind of points of view.
Yeah.
And this is a reality that is not just from Huasco. At least in Chile, it's reflected throughout different parts of the country. Like you see it in the coast, in the Central Valley, you see it in the north, you see it in the south with like salmon companies, or like where the rainforests are. Like how wood has been abstracted or removed from the environment. So. And that happens here in Canada. It happens in British Columbia, with wood. It happens, in areas where the First Nations are, like it happens in many countries. It's a common thing that, so what's happening here is also kind of a metaphor to other places. It could be reflected in different places. And so when we were there, sometimes I cannot speak about this because of because it's not necessarily my interviews of my research. It's Eduardo's, and it's part of the university. So, but I was part of some of the interviews with people that were in favor and people that were against that, and First Nations activists, and some of the reasons were like they lost family members because of cancer, and because of the water was polluted, and how that affected their children, because for a period of time they didn't want to drink water because they were afraid, or they didn't want to shower because they were afraid, I think, or how people have to move away from towns like Huasco to live in a more in a settlement, in a bus, because they didn't have resources to actually have a house, but they didn't want to live in this area that was completely polluted. So there's kind of a violence happening from the states and from these companies towards how people live. That is very, very difficult. And I think from my point of view, and this is very personal from my point of view, I'm not talking as a team, again, because there's politics involved in terms of, the organizations and the universities and all that. From my point of view, that affects me more, than having enough economy, or having a good job, or because they talk, like, for instance, these companies or the state, they talk about progress, right? Oh, we're going to build better roads, or we're going to put a better school, and then they leave, and sometimes speaking with like people there, they say like, I have everything, like I'm not a rich person, in terms of money, and they live in these beautiful adobe houses. But they say like, we have everything that we want here. Like when they talk about progress for us, we don't really understand what progress is. We used to live with like a very natural environment, free of pollution, where we can grow our vegetables. So we have a really quiet life that we can live with our door open all day, and there's no violence, there's no, etc., etc. So their quality of life is measured not by economy,
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And it's hard to understand where the balance is, because
Yeah, it is.
Obviously none of us, we don't live in the same way. We don't like to live in the same way, but to live as a community, we need to be able to create a balance. And sometimes that balance, or many times that balance has been it doesn't exist, and things are forced into other people. Again, there's images like this one where this is a pig processing plant that is supposedly on hold, and that is in the middle of the valley, that it affected the valley in different kind of ways with pollution and bad smells, etc. But there's more kind of abstract or metaphorical images like this one, that speak about the plants or the environment or the valley itself. So in most of my images, there's a lot of kind of lines, from the cable lines to the train lines, and this idea of connection visually as a valley, but also this idea of connection for them to feel disconnected from opportunities, to being left behind by the state, but also like the connection of the train tracks and how that, the pollution has been kind of coming from the mountains all the way to the ocean, in terms of connection, in terms of things being distributed or the pollution being distributed through the valley, that became important, and that in a way it's a visual connection that is happening through the images, like what you see here. And that is very very subtle, and it wasn't conscious, but it's still there, in different ways. But yeah, like there's images that are more abstract. I like sometimes where images are very to the point and they're easy to understand, but you have some other images in between that a little bit more abstract, or create center certain amount of tension perhaps into an edit. And that's what I normally hopefully try to do. I'm hoping to be successful with that at some points.
With that last project, you had one project that was, I hate calling it subdued, but it was, etheric, it was contemplative. And then this one, which is very subject driven. It's very location driven. It's about our presence on the world. And I'm kind of curious, the impact of this last one on you. Did it have an impact on you? A lingering one, maybe?
It definitely did. In different ways. I was aware, for instance, of what was happening there, because again, it's been happening and it's on the news here with local things, but also throughout Chile. But I was never in those places looking, at what was happening, or what has been happening, or talking to the people. So that really affected me.
Because like I've noticed this, photographers, we are a product of our attention. So whatever we put attention to, a lot of times we have this feeling, and then all of a sudden we take an image. But that attention has a price to it, and I've noticed that with a lot of people that take on projects like this one, that there's a price to be paid. Would you agree to that?
And what do you mean by a price to be paid? In what sense?
It affects us.
Oh yeah,
it affects us. Like there's a lingering for paying attention.
Yeah, and
yeah,
it does. It does. I maybe I still don't know in what way exactly. Perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, I've noticed that after this project, it's been harder for me to start something else, and before I used to like shoot a lot just for the sake of shooting, and that's why I've been forcing myself to do that this year a little bit more. And I'm not sure if it's because of the importance of this topic, and that I had a researcher working with me, which is something that I didn't have before. I think maybe that's part of it. And it's not that if I do a project on my own, it's not important, but somehow in my head, it feels like that. Obviously it's harder to express something, on your own. Sometimes.
Sure. Absolutely.
But this definitely became very important. Mind you, I'm also very, I want to be very conscious and very, I don't want to say political, but like being careful of everything that I say, because it's not necessarily I'm a Chilean, and this obviously affects me because I have people there and etc. And I go back to there, and I plan to go back at some point to live again to Chile. But I'm also living far away, so somehow I'm looking at this from the outside, and I want to be very respectful with the people that live there, because it's their environment, and I feel that it's like, who am I to actually go there, take photos, and tell their story? And I took a few portraits, but those portraits are not part of the project. I think I will need to spend a lot of time to actually make those portraits be or those people be the voice of the project. I want to be very conscious and very respectful that this is my point of view of that data. That is very, as engineers, the data is very to the point, by numbers. And that affected with the things that I saw and the conversations, the dialogues that we had with the local people, my own interpretation.
Sure.
So it's not necessarily a documentary project. It has aspects of documentary. And why I say that, because I also feel, again, that it's my own interpretation, it's subjective, based on this data, informed by this data.
The thoughtfulness comes across. It comes across. And I think you did a great job representing that.